here in Denver. We are excited to host a panel of some of the most brilliant minds on the topic of ink who will be speaking to us this morning. Rick Griffith is going to moderate the panel, so please welcome up Rick to moderate our panel on ink.
I just want to take a moment and thank the panel that made themselves available with such short notice. And they are a pretty broad group of people. Some of them I've known for years. But remember, this landscape of printers and inkers is changing constantly. So, of course, I'll take criticism for having 5 dudes on the panel. But believe me, I know that there's plenty of other people out there, and just reach out and make yourself known to us. I have one starting comment. Ink, like energy, cannot be created or destroyed. Here, it simply moves from one place to the next. Keep that in mind as you welcome our first speaker, Stuart Alden.
This is intimidating. That's a really good quote. We teach workshops, and we often talk about that in the context of charm in ink, in that when you screen print, ink ends up in places you would never imagine where it's going to end up. It's like I often end up with ink under here. There's days that it looks like I slapped a clown because I have so many colors of ink on my hand. Ink Lounge is, real quick. Whose mother saves everything you've ever had? You learn over the years just to take it when she's like, here's these 10 watercolors that you did in high school, because otherwise she'll save them. And so this way you can take them and throw them in the trash. But the one thing she did save that I love, this is my first screen print. I know I'm like, that's adorable. In second grade, somebody came to our class with a pre-exposed screen, and we all brought a shirt that day, and we got to pull a print. And I think the fun thing about it is that it says, art has always been a highly respected profession. And so it's kind of funny, 40 years later, here I am doing ink. I am a graphic designer. A lot of times it's like an AA meeting. You get up here and say, I'm a graphic designer. I think a lot of us are graphic designers, and then we sort of evolve over the years. Ink Lounge, we never meant to create. Ink Lounge is run by my wife and I. And I did ask Rick if Nikki, my better, cuter, nicer half, could show up, and he said that the other board might be intimidated because we didn't want to gang up on him. And if you know my wife, she's like the sweetest person ever, so it's like she would never gang up on anyone. But I do want to give props to her because I would not be here without her. She wouldn't be there without me. It's just like we're a good collaborative team, and she's also a graphic designer. Being graphic designers, about 10 years ago, I started playing with ink. Just the technology we have. I forgot to turn on my timer. I can ramble forever. As graphic designers, we spend a lot of time with technology. I graduated from CSU about 20 some odd years ago, and it was very much an illustration-based design program. And so over the years, as a graphic designer, everything needs to end up a lot of the time digitally, because you have to send out to have it be commercially printed or online. And about 10 years ago, I bought a speedball kit, and it was one of these things where it sat on the shelf and was sort of intimidating for probably 6 months, and I'd get out and play with it, and it's just frustrating as hell, because it's like, you can't expose things, you can't get any consistency, it was frustrating. So I started digging into it, and we first opened Ink Lounge as a gallery/workshops with the idea next to our design studio. So we had 2 spaces. Our first Ink Lounge was 600 square feet. We started bringing in artists from around the country, the Dakota Ring in Austin, Yeehaw, Letterpress, some local people that we'd met. And basically it's like we started doing workshops to fund our sort of habit. It's just like we like printing on ink and paper, and we just need a way to fund doing our own screen printing. We had no idea what we'd gotten ourselves into. The first year we started doing workshops, it was about 7.5 years ago, we did about 6 workshops. In a 600 square foot space that the sink was on the other side of the space. It's about this big, no water pressure. And it was tough, but we had fun. And we grew out of that space. We started doing more. We moved to a space down off of South Tacoma that was about 1,300 square feet. And it had a big garage in the back, and it had design offices in the front. And that was good. And we continued to grow, and we continued to expand. And I'll admit, early on, when we started doing the workshops, I was bound and determined. It's like, this is an art. People want to learn the entire process. But along the way, we were doing some workshops for kids on T-shirts. And one day, about 4 years ago, my wife was just like, we should do one of these for adults. And I'm like, yeah, we should give them a beer, too. So it's just like, they come in and print on, it's like, you for a small fee, people come in, and it's like on a Tuesday night, it's like, let's try it. It sold, it was only 8 spots, but it filled in like a day and a half. And we're like, oh, there's a big community out there that just wants to do a project. They don't care how the screens are made or exposed or any of that. They just want to come in and print and play for a while. So we started doing more of those. 2 years ago, we hit 100 workshops. And that's anything from 8-year-old birthday parties, 80-year-old birthday parties. We do, we call them team build inks, where companies will bring a creative team in, or we've had engineering companies bring a team in. And so we started looking for a bigger space. This is our new space that we moved into about a year ago, and it's 3,700 square feet now, which has allowed us to have 2 different workshop areas, because people can come in and get certified, so they can come back and do their own printing in this space as well. There's that. I'll run through a couple of these photos. We do a lot of commercial printing for people too. I think one of the things for me, what I like about ink is that, and screen printing specifically, is that it's such a versatile medium. You can do so many different things with it. It can be as commercial as you want it. It can be as artistic as you want it. You can do it all on the computer. You can do it all by hand. You can use no technology. I mean, you can expose screens in the sun. We have a commercial exposure unit. So there's a lot of different ways to do the process. And with that process, we have so many things bouncing around in our head and ideas, and it's always like we're in the middle of printing some wood signs for our neighbors. We've done, actually, here at the museum, they have these activity carts, and the headers, they were having them custom made, and the headers are about 4 feet by about 2 feet. And they came to us a few years ago asking us to screen print these silhouettes of animals and numbers on them because they were numbered. And my first response is, well, why don't you just go get vinyl put on them? And Lisa here was just like, little kids' fingers like to pick at vinyl. And so it's like, we need something a little more permanent. And so I often start off conversations with people who come to us with, in theory. In theory, it can be done. It's just figuring out how it can be done. And that's one of the things I really love about screen printing. It's like, you can do so many things with it, but it's just like, and it's funny, within the screen printing industry, screen printers will admit there are a zillion different ways to do things. They will also turn right around and say the way they do it is the correct way. And it's like, they're right. But I love the troubleshooting and probleming. There's a technical side to it that we really like as well. So these are just some openings or pictures from our opening that we had, so you can kind of get a sense of the new space. The wall, you can't quite see it in here. We have a saying called "embrace the charm," and that's something that we teach in the workshops. And for us, there can be sort of a stereotypical aesthetic with screen printing where there's grit and charm and stuff like that, and people are often like, how do I pull, the squeegee to get that to look like that? And it's actually not. It's generally in the artwork. It can be 3 minutes. Rick, it's just like it can also be very precise. It can be super clean, pristine, but it can also be rough and charming as well. So embracing the charm as designers like to come in and they think it's going to be perfect the very first time. In 7.5 years, we've only had one person cry. And so that's also one of our rules. We tell people it's like there is no crying in screen printing, but swearing is allowed. Because there are plenty of times that we work on things and it is an energy. It moves and you can't control it. And there's just things, it's a lot like golf. There's a lot of things that have to happen for that golf ball to go straight. And to get a good, consistent run of prints, there's a lot of things that have to happen in order for that to work out well. There's my wife in the front. 2 minutes? For our opening, we do work with kids a lot. There's a program called Think 360 here in Denver. It's an arts and education, K through 12. And we are one of their artists and schools. We go into schools and work with kids in after-school programs. So for our opening, we put on the flyer, it's just like, oh, from this hour, we'll let kids come in and pull a print on a T-shirt. And we had no idea what to expect. We were thinking, okay, there might be like 10, 15 kids. We had a room full of parents and kids, and it ended up taking us about an hour and a half to sort of get through all the kids. But it's just really fun to see their little arms get up to them. We do have a commercial press. There's the Embrace the Charm. And the photos, these are all old screens. And then it's like class photo day. We always take photos of people holding up their screens. Like that. I think that's about all I have. So thank you. We're excited to be here, and thank you to Rick and the museum.
Good morning, guys. This is me, except I have 2 L's in my name. I work at Peter Tattoo. I'm a custom tattoo artist. One of the things that I wanted to talk about when it came to ink in tattoos and paintings is the permanence in that. And with that permanence, accepting that mistakes are going to happen and not being necessarily okay with those mistakes, but limiting the situations in those mistakes are good. Sorry, this is my first time talking in front of people. But thank you. But limiting the situations in which those mistakes are made. I've spilled ink on tons of paintings. I've put my rinse cup in the wrong spot, knocked it over and ruined a completely awesome painting that I was super stoked on. And, you just rip that thing to pieces and get super upset. And then also, I've put my rinse cup a little bit too close to my drinking water. And you learn the hard way that ink is really gross to drink. Some of the interesting things with tattooing is I can order my favorite type of paper. I can order my favorite type of canvas. But when it comes to tattooing, everyone that comes through the door has a different skin type. They want something different. They have, some people have really stretchy skin. Some people have really tight skin. And you've got to work with that. Working with your difficulties regardless of your situation. You've got some people that come in and they want to get a stomach tattoo, and stomach skin stretches drastically differently than, like a nice tight calf. So after a long stomach session, your left hand, your stretching hand gets really tired. And with the canvas of human skin, you want to make sure that your tattoo moves with the body in the right way. If you put a piece that's in just the little bit wrong spot, but it's a nice looking tattoo, it's going to still look wrong down the road. Let's see here. With that, that's why we use stencils usually with tattoos, or sometimes you'll draw it on. There's one artist out there named Carl Grace, and he just goes completely freehand, and it terrifies me because he's way too good at what he does. With ink and tattoo, as soon as you start your tattoo, you're instantly throwing biohazard contaminants into your ink, and that's why all tattoo artists are trained with bloodborne pathogens. We all have body art licenses, and to that, as far as, limiting the situations in which mistakes are made, not spilling your ink, not touching things while you're gloved besides your client, absolutely not spilling your rinse cup. That's a bad day. And then also, when you're done with a painting, you frame it and it's done. When it comes to tattoos, there's a certain extra part of that where your client has to heal the tattoo in the right way. And if your client does a poor job at taking care of your nice new tattoo that you spent so much time on, there can be scabbing, there can be scarring, there can be pieces of the ink that fall out, and it's really frustrating. Let's see. And also that comes down to preparing a design that will hold up over time. If you put together a tattoo that has too much small detail, that's too close together, over time the ink kind of dissipates in your skin and you end up with like a blurry blob on your body, and that's a huge bummer. And let's see, that goes into putting enough black into a tattoo. You want that color contrast in your skin. You want it to look nice down the road. Sun is your biggest enemy when it comes down to keeping your tattoo nice over time, and that's an interesting part with tattoos is got to wear some sunscreen on there if you're going to go out and swim, or you got to make sure that you put your tattoo in a spot that's going to heal nice. Palm tattoos are really rough to heal in, elbows, things like that. You want to make sure that you're putting it on a good canvas so that your ink stays in there nice, stays solid down the road. Let's see. And I guess in the end of it, with tattoos, it's a very personal experience with your client. You're changing their self-image for the rest of their life. And, it's a very close and intimate relationship with your client who trusts you to make sure that you're not going to botch this job. Like with this one, the top one was a pretty terrible tattoo. Had to draw some marker over it, and then the bottom is, the final rendition of that. And in the end of it, it's all about making your client happy and making sure that they leave with a positive environment. And that's why with ink and tattoos, it's a very gratifying career to be in. And yeah, so there's another one. And that's all I have. Thanks for having me.
Put something else up there. I come to ink and to printing through poetry. I wanted to say something, and I wanted to put it in a form that would be valued and kept. And I think maybe the earliest efforts to try to preserve and save what we know about the world is probably not ink, but carving, sculptures, marking a stick, counting stick, a carved stone inscription on a gravestone. I want to remember that person. we think in terms of trying to preserve things, and I wanted to sort of touch on a bunch of these things. I'm Tom Parson. I do letterpress printing. I'm now working on a project to move all of my stuff that I've accumulated into an old train depot in Englewood. That'll be the living museum of letterpress printing, typography, design, poetry, and art. And I thought maybe I'd start out. I think I'll read you a little book. This is about 100-year-old book of called Typographic Printing Surfaces, and LeGros and Grant. It's got the instructions for all the ways type surfaces have been done. And they start out this book, if we accept the marks left by fossils, such as those of leaves, shells, and other natural objects in soft clay, hardened and turned to stone by the long-drawn action of ages, probably the first printing surface in the world was the thumb or finger of some hunter ancestor of our race, producing its impress in blood on the blue-white surface of skin freshly torn from his quarry. The first printing surface was on skin. Now that's not preserving anything. That's the function of recognizing I've got some food. I've got a function. I've got a useful thing. I can eat. So that's the first printing thing had. Well, what I look at now is I had another slide that's not on here. The very first image of a printing press, 1499. The printing was 1450 or so. 1499. The first printing, the image of a press, is a dance macabre, the dance of death. There's these figures coming up, and they're grabbing the guy setting the type, and they're grabbing the guy pulling the lever on the screwing the press, and they're grabbing the bookbinder, and they're all going, "Go away, leave me alone. I want to survive. This is a way to preserve what we know," and it's a hopeless task. We're all going to go. We got this range of stuff, and I've always thought that was kind of pretty indicative of what we're up against as printers. If you read a book on the history of printing, every other story that comes is he printed 100 books. He inherited this type and used this kind of thing, printed on this paper, and then he died. and then he died. And then he died. It's an endless process. So how do we save this stuff? And what is that? It's when you carve in stone, you carve a letter, and then you got to finish it off. The Roman carvings, they would carve an end stroke at the bottom of the stroke. It became a serif that's in your old style typefaces. It got frozen into type when it got changed into metal printing surfaces. So it went from the challenge of early printing was to make it look like it was handwritten. You write it a certain way, and then you try to imitate that in metal so that you can trick people into thinking the Gutenberg Bible was actually handwritten, and you leave a place for the ornamental caps in there. So there's a process of kind of taking this stuff and going from one format, one process to another, and in the course of it gets changed and frozen, and perhaps it works and preserved. But what we've got today is something totally different. When over the course of centuries, the letter forms, you might see that on a letter on an O there's a fat part of it and a narrow part of it. where did that come from? Why don't you just make a straight circle? Well, it turns out in 1915 or sometime, Edward Johnson was studying calligraphy, and he figured out that's because somebody wrote it with a pen. And they wrote it, and they tipped the pen a little bit, and you got a broad stroke, and then a narrow stroke, and a broad stroke. And that's in the type design. That's the old style type. So there's a history of the process that was used, and it was forgotten. Nobody knew where that came from. Basically, they called it old style design, but they'd forgotten that it was written. It was part of it was frozen in type, and then the type designers straightened it up and cleaned it up, and it got upright and changed the. So we're I think where we are today is we don't teach cursive writing anymore. How many of you, when you write, know how to write even to read? My son couldn't read cursive writing. He said, "What does that mean when you lose a?" I'm going to flip through a couple of things here. Is that legible? What is that stuff? What is that stuff? Now, right there, we have. Do you write in capital letters? The capitals came from stone carvings, from monuments. The lowercase, lots of languages don't even have a lowercase. There's just one set of letters. We have this stuff. Where did this come from? This A. That's an A. It's a cursive writing that got turned into another way to write, to shape the letters, and then they had Charlemagne in Europe said we need to standardize our writing and get it so that everybody can read it around the empire. And so he hired some guy to come out and find the most beautiful lettering and turn it into the official way you should write your letters. And that's where we got these lowercase letters. There's a history to this stuff that we're now reducing to Twitter and to people are writing. I mean, I've seen people say, "Why are you yelling at me? Because you're using periods. You're using punctuation. You're doing all capitals." That's like, what is that about? We're dropping the history of where this stuff came from and how it was used, and suddenly making. We have this wonderful lowercase bunch of letters, and if you can't read it, what happens? It's I don't know. I'm going to back up. So that stuff is not letters, although actually that's the artist's name there. That's kind of fake calligraphy. It's taken symbolic writing that looks like letters into an expressive form of. That's Juan Miró. I think that's his signature down there, but I don't know. At any rate, it's a 1950s work of. This was from probably 18th century or something, or maybe 16th, 17th century. Well, one of the things that happened is in the late 19th century, people started realizing, what is this stuff? Where's the letter? What is that? Is that an M or is it an upside down W? Well, I figured it out because the guy's initials that designed it are down here. His initials are down here and down here. So that's got to be an M. It can't be. I turn it around, staring at it. Going, which way does that thing go? And something happened to the shape of letters. Now, when we look at modern writing, we write in a block letter. In the early 20th century, they got rid of all this stuff. That stuff's unreadable. That's ugly old typefaces. It's all over the place. What what can you do? And we cleaned it up to basic, simple forms. And in the Art Nouveau era, these are out of a collection of ornamental initials that I have. So as a Gothic letter, but the background, the ornamentation becomes as important as the letter. So nowadays, when I do printing for people, they want to feel the paper and they want it to be driven in. They want a sculptural object. They want a tactile experience. I mean, that's not what this is about. This is about having a message, having a content. There's words involved. I want to print my poems or other people's poems. I want you to read the thing and know what it is. What does it say? Why is it? That's what I want to. And people are coming in. Well, I don't care if that thing's all beat up, if it's wood type and it's damaged. Doesn't matter. I like the feel of it. I like the deconstructed feel of that stuff. So we're shifting back and forth through how we use and how we perceive these things. And for me, just to close it off, I'm working because I've got all this equipment. When I started collecting stuff in about 1983, moved here, got a press. I need more of this stuff. It was all collapsing. Letterpress stuff was being junked. I have 2,500 fonts of metal type and about 15 presses and a couple hundred fonts of wood type. I've collected all this stuff. I got the books on it that I had to research it to figure out what the heck it is. How do I save that? If you put it in a library, in a rare book room, do you ever go there? Do you ever touch that stuff? If you put it in a museum setting, behind glass, the way to preserve things is to use them, is to break them, to use them up. When you hit type into paper, it wears it out. Somebody's got to know how to make that again. So I'm trying to figure out a way to put this stuff that I've accumulated into a living museum where people will be able to use it and learn what those parts are for. We're missing a bolt. Where do we get that? We're missing the frisket on the press. It's necessary to print it. Oh, well, that was in the way, so we stuck it in the back room. And then it got lost. And so it's a process. So I'm trying to figure all this stuff out. We'll talk on a panel. Thank you for coming. Slide it. Slide up to the next person. We've got a couple of postings.
Good morning. My name is Aaron Kors. I own and operate Into Ink Screen Printing. We are primarily a commercial screen printer. We've been operating in Denver for a little over 10 years now. I personally have been putting ink on T-shirts in a variety of different ways for a variety of different reasons for over the past 15 years. Take a break here for a second. I really enjoy it. I really enjoy screen printing. It's what I do for a living, and I still have a passion for it. I think if you meet somebody who says, I'm a master screen printer, I know everything about it, just wait a couple months. The ink's going to change. The garments are going to change. People's perception of what they want on the shirt's going to change. You're going to have to start all over. That makes things really challenging for me, and it makes it enjoyable because, it's always a process of learning new things, and I enjoy learning new things. I'd like to briefly go over the types of inks that we use in the industry, kind of give you a little insight to how I came to be where I am, and then talk about where things are now for people who currently have a desire to start a clothing line or to start printing their own things. And this is my ink wall at work. My favorite time of the day is just being able to go mix colors. Kind of relaxing. I get to walk around. You got to look at the ink in different lights. You look at it in daylight and bad fluorescent lighting because your customer is going to see it in every different light. So, and they're comparing it from a computer screen onto the shirt. So it's kind of a process and a technique that you learn over time what people's perception of this color is going to be based on that other color. And it's enjoyable. This wall is plastisol ink. The primary inks used in the industry are plastisol inks and water-based. The difference being the binder. This is an oil-based ink. Water-based is a water-based ink. The plastisol ink is essentially made of plastic. It is very similar to what you create PVC pipe out of. If you started with that material, turn it into a pipe, it's very similar to this material here that we turn into a t-shirt graphic. It basically will stay wet. It will stay in a sort of liquid form for a very long time. It makes it very easy to work with. You can put it on your screens. You can go take lunch. You can come back the next day and you can still use it. It is specifically developed for the industry to be used on garments, and that's why it's used most of the time, and that's most of the images that you see are going to be a plastisol print. And there's a variety of techniques to kind of get away from the plasticky feel of it. It all just kind of depends on the aesthetic that you're looking for when creating the shirt. So this ink stays wet all the time unless you cure it. To do that, it has to get over 300 degrees for around 15 seconds. To do that, we placed it through a big dryer and a conveyor belt so the shirts don't catch on fire, basically. This ink just actually lays on top of the garment itself. It's just like another layer. That's what makes it very opaque. You're not competing with the dyes of the fabric of the shirt. It's just another layer sitting directly on top of it. When it goes through the dryer, it bonds and goes from a liquid into a solid form. And during that process, it kind of just bonds to the actual fibers of the shirt. Very similar to welding two metals together. It has a chemical reaction and it becomes part of the shirt. That's why your print stays on your shirt for the life of the shirt, and you can wash it and it's still there and it's still bright and it's still the color. The other type of ink would be a water-based ink. The water is the binder, and basically you put it on the shirt, it soaks into the shirt, and then the water evaporates and you're left with just the pigment. This gives you a very soft print. This is what you'll find in most hobby stores. It's very approachable because you don't need a lot of fancy equipment to work with it. Drawbacks are it does dry up in your screen. It's hard to work with. Most poster printing and other types of printing are used with water-based inks. This is kind of making a comeback in the industry, and there's been a lot of advancements with water-based. A lot of customers, people looking to create t-shirts want the soft vintage feel, and this is a way to accomplish that. Drawback is that it is not opaque. I think you're telling me 3 minutes left, or that's all I've done? Wow, 3 minutes left. That's awesome. All right, I'll wrap this up. That went by really quick. So there's water-based ink, and there's downfalls to that and everything. I kind of want to briefly just tell you so this is plastisol sitting on top of a shirt. This is water-based. You can see the ribs of the shirt in it soaking into it. To kind of get away, there's also discharge ink to get away from the dye on the shirt. You can remove that ink and then put your ink on top of it. I was first attracted to screen printing when I was a teenager in the 90s. I saw a picture of Sid Vicious on stage with the Pink Floyd shirt, and he took a marker and he wrote, "I hate" on top of it. And I loved it. It was very simple. It was very approachable. I understood it. I was a kid. I had markers. I had T-shirts. I could do that. So I started just looking at T-shirts that I identified with, just things that I could manipulate. I used markers, dye. Didn't really know about screen printing. Once I went into college, I met up with a group of friends that did screen printing. I tagged along with them. I started to learn. Further on in my college career, I went to the University of Denver and came across Shepard Fairey's art. He was kind of doing something that I also found very approachable, very simple, and it just kind of connected with me. It's basically just put up this image just everywhere as an experiment just to see what would happen. How would people react to it? And it had a giant reaction. Everybody was like, "What is that? I don't know." And it just kind of became its own entity. And that sort of opened the door for me and inspired me to say, all right, I can create something out of nothing, basically. I mean, that could work. I don't have to be a skateboard company. I don't have to be a snowboard company. I can just be an artist doing things. So then we bought the equipment. I wanted to do a clothing line. And I kind of fell in love with the process with screen printing. We ended up doing shirts for our friends, tattoo artists, local businesses. And then about 5 years prior to me starting buying the equipment, Mark Echo really pushed, along with some other kind of entrepreneurs, kind of pushed the industry. They really developed plastisol inks. They looked at what was available at the time and weren't really satisfied with it. They said, I can do better. I'm going to push this. I'm going to add additives and foils and everything. So I just kind of fell in love with the process. And luckily, there were people ahead of me that were doing stuff and made it easier for me. Today, if you want to do a clothing line, do printing, it's a lot easier than when I started out. It's still very difficult, but there are avenues set up for you. There's my shop. There's a handful of other shops in Denver. There's shops all around the country that can give you 12 shirts for under $100. You don't have to learn how to do it yourself. There's now an industry, a market where you can say, hey, I'm going to have this as a service I'm going to utilize. I can go there. They can print my shirts. You don't have to walk around town with a backpack trying to sell them. You have the internet. You can start an Etsy page. You can go, Squarespace is like $15 a month for an e-commerce. There's a lot of avenues for you to be able to go and get to a market and be creative. And this is just isn't t-shirts. This is any kind of artwork that you're doing. So yeah, I just kind of, I mean, if you are going to do it, I said you don't need to. I would definitely recommend, if you have an interest, to actually learn how to do it. It's going to be very beneficial. If you learn about the process, it's going to help you create designs, and you might actually really enjoy it like I do. So yeah, thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody, and thank you, Rick, for roping me into this. My name's Jason Wedekin. I run Genghis Kern, a letterpress and design shop up in the Highlands. And I thought I would go on to this little ink odyssey by telling you guys how I got into letterpress printing. And fortunately, the person that taught me is sitting in the front row. Tom Parson. It's been a crazy road. About 11 years ago, I was working at an ad agency as an art director, a small agency in town. And someone came in, and they had a beautifully printed card, and they needed a couple of 6-point initials added to the person's name. Like, they had a new degree. They wanted to, not waste this expensive card. And I looked at the print broker, and I said, how the hell are we going to do this? And she goes, well, you're going to have to do a letterpress, like handset letterpress. And I was like, okay, and that is... at that point, I had been exposed to letterpress as a designer through Hatch show print in our annuals and stuff. And I knew about it, but didn't really understand the whole process. So someone recommended Tom to me, and I was like, I called him up, said, hey, I need to do this. Went to his house, and his shop is behind his house. And I walked through this door, and it was just, you're transported into a different world. There's type everywhere, actual lead type, wood type, imagery everywhere. I'm just like, oh my gosh, the smell of ink and everything. I was like, this is awesome. And eyes open, just crazy. So I met with Tom. He kind of explained to me how it goes. And so we did that job. It worked. The client was super psyched. She was like, oh, this is great. And I said, will you teach me how to do this? He was like, yeah, sure. So a couple weeks later, a month, whatever, I designed a card for somebody, and I was like, I'm going to print this letterpress. So I called up Tom. He showed me basically every step of the process, from making the plates, locking up the chase, getting it on the press. And he gets it on the press, and his press has a treadle and a motor, but his treadle, you kick this thing 5 times for one cycle of the press. And he's kicking it, and we're talking, and I'm like, hey, can I try that? And he's like, yeah, sure. So he steps aside, and I start kicking. And you take the paper, you put it in the press as you're kicking, and then you pull it out, and you take it. And we just kept talking, and in 40 minutes, I kicked about 600 cards on the press. And he was like, how do you know how to do this? And I said, funny story. I grew up in Chicago, and my family has a manufacturing business. So at the age of 5 to 15, I would work every summer in this factory in Chicago making tools. And we'll get to that later, but Tom's like, you need a big press, because every designer, when you get into letterpress, you're like, oh, I want this little press. And the actual, especially now, 10 years later, like the reality is the little presses are really expensive, and the big presses, sometimes you can get them somewhat economically. So that day, I left like, I'm gonna get into, or I'm just curious. And so told Tom I was interested, go back to work. Year later, we have another letterpress job come up. I call up Tom, hey, we need to print this. And we print it. It was like a report cover or whatnot. And 2 days later, I get a call. I remember it like it was yesterday. I'm sitting at work. Jason, Tom Parson on line 1. And I'm like, this is it, people. I'm getting a press today. And I'm like, hey, Tom, how's it going? And he's like, oh, great. Where'd you get that paper you brought by 2 days ago? And I was like, So that wasn't the day. But about a week later, he calls me up, and he's like, I found a press. Like, let's meet me up at lunch. And I ran at lunch that day, went and saw this print shop that was closing up, and I ended up buying out my first print shop. Like, it was amazing. I remember driving home. I had about 24 type cases banging around the back of my car, and I'm like, what the hell did I just do? I don't even know if I like this. And, obviously, had I not met Tom, I wouldn't be standing up here today talking about this, so I am very blessed. Like, thank you, Tom, for teaching me that. It's been quite the ride. So, back to the manufacturing backup. So, when you get into letterpress, and people know you're into it, you'll start getting emails like, hey, I saw this for sale here, I know somebody who's got some type. It never stops. My wife, I like to tell her, this never happens. Like, I need to buy this. And she points out that it always happens. Don't even. So I got an email from a guy that I used to work with at Integer, and he's like, hey, is this interesting to you? And I'm looking at it, and I thought it was bigger than I needed, but it actually was exactly what I needed. So I told the lady, I'm going to buy it, sight unseen, Craigslist, South Colorado. I go down there, and it's a little sign press, and it was made in Chicago. I'm like, oh, no way, I'm from Chicago. And so I gave the woman the money, and I brought it home, and I took a bunch of pictures, and I sent them to my dad in Chicago. And he's like, I'll be damned. And I'm like, what, Dad? He's like, I made that. And I'm like, what do you mean you made what? And he's like, that tool right there, this tool right here. I'm like, you made this? Because it does, to be fair. It looks exactly like the tool I made for 10 years as a little kid. And I was like, he goes, yeah, I used to drive those to the I'm like, the Morgan Sign Company? He's like, yep, once a week. Drove them, delivered them. So basically, this tool, when I was 5, my dad would set up the machine, and I would put this little ferrule in here, and it was cast iron kick press. I would press this thing down. I'd be sitting in a chair at 5 years old. Press this thing down, and I would drive the wooden handle into this ferrule for about a week. And then he would change the machine, and I would drive this U-frame into the handle for another week. Then he would change it again, and I would drive a wooden roller into it, and then it was done. It was a seam roller for wallpaper, like when you put 2 seams together. So unbeknownst to me, my family would make these for the Morgan Sign Company, and the Morgan Sign Company would put a composition roller on here, and they would sell these with each one of their presses, this little kit. And so if you owned a department store in Chicago or anywhere, you would get a sign press. And every day you'd walk in and you would it came with type and the press and ink and a brayer, and you would set like shirts, $3 on sale, and you would print it, pull it once and print it, and then put that piece of paper up, and then people knew it was on sale that day. So my family made these and sold them with those guys, which I was like, pretty cool. So so from this, like, we get into this transfer of ink to paper. Like, that's what it's all about. Whether it's ink on type, ink on imagery, that ink on paper, it's what it's all about. So modern letterpress, we talk about the bite, like Tom mentioned, the bite of the paper. Like, thanks to Martha Stewart, when you see letterpress now, it's like hit so hard you can read it backwards through the back of the sheet. In the old days, it was what we call kiss impression. So there's this kiss versus bite. I spent the first 5 years just playing with kiss impression, trying to get ink perfectly to sit on whatever substrate, whether it's coated, uncoated, and then realized that, like, when people come and want letterpress printing, they want to see the impression. So you get the press fired up, and you pull that first hit, the first impression, and you pull that piece of paper out, and you hold it up to the light. Like that moment will never, I don't think, Tom can tell me, it never gets old. It's like you sit there and you see how the type has, just bent into the paper maybe ever so slightly. It's like, it is so, in this digital world we live in, it's a refreshing thing. It's so, I don't know, we spend so much time in front of our computers, and it's very important. Like, so now that I've gotten into letterpress, it's very important, I think, to step away from that computer and just soak up. I mean, every speaker today has shown it. Soak up what you have around you. So I think I'm going to challenge you guys to go today, tomorrow, in the future, and create something. Like whether it's a pen on ink, a spoon, a potato print, like step away from your computer and consciously create something, because you'll be surprised. It's fun. So. I realized I couldn't multitask. Oh, boom. So let's just roll through these real quick. So this is a can of like 50-year-old German ink. It has the highest pigment load in it, and I didn't know that until I printed from it, and I showed it to a printer, and he goes, "Whoa, where'd you get this ink? This is incredible. Look at the pigment load. It's like the blackest black you'll ever see." There's a little shot of ink in here. Then last night I printed up some ephemera up here that people can take. There's some ink, use, stain. That's actually brand new wood type created that mimicking old stuff. Here's some spraying, wood type on there. Get the rollers. Yeah, little handset type. We won't get into this. But Louise Raymond from Delhi, Colorado. Ink Spirit. We'll leave on that. Make something. Yeah.
Kind of our whole youth culture was, I don't think, really replicated in other countries as much. So, yeah, that's an awesome point. Like, I would agree. How do you guys feel?
Well, honestly, I think a lot of it has to do with commercialism in the U.S. I mean, companies put logos on everything, and I think I've traveled around the world quite a bit, and it's like there's a lot of people that I've seen screen printing and doing other things on shirts. But yeah, Yankees do tend to wear logo stuff everywhere.
I don't know wearable fabrics, but if you look back in the 19th century, the Japanese influence on wallpaper woodblock prints, this flattening of surfaces and layering of surfaces happened that went into wallpaper and textiles in England, America back then. I mean, it's not entirely an American invention. Some of this stuff, we're still trying to figure out how you make something feel three-dimensional, two-dimensional when you flatten it that way. What is that about? So.
Yeah, I mean, a clear answer on that would also be talking about the silk trade and the migration of silk patterns and different types of printing techniques from the east to the west, roughly around like the 16th and 17th century, right? And that went to Europe and became the Vienna Secession, which is a very highly patterned sort of nouveau movement, which means that, I mean, in America, a logo is a logo, but a printed shirt or a pattern of some kind isn't expressly American.
Ink itself, I don't know. What strikes me about the digital stuff that's happened is that we think it's timeless. That we think it doesn't exist in a context. If you have a typeface or an image, you'd like it because that's what I like. You see it abstractly as something in the present all the time. And in handling printing materials, it takes me back into the history of things, the connections, the community of things, rather than just an aesthetic surface that's there. So I don't know. I mean, I think some of the return to interest in handmade things and ragged-looking type, rugged, distressed wood type, that's sort of the tactile stuff. Some of that's in revolt against, in our sort of inner revolt against things being too orderly and too clean, and too removed from our own hands. So I think it's probably a dynamic that's going to go back and forth, and we'll go through. I mean, the interest in handwritten type fonts on the computer. It's possible to take your own handwriting and print a text from it. And you couldn't do that in metal type. It's just impossible. You had to reduce it into a regular form and make it in metal and then print it. And it's going to take us in ways we just don't even understand, or we can't imagine right away.
Colin, what's the ink situation?
With tattoos, I feel that I've got a pretty solid, pretty solid future. I mean, with moving into the digital age, machines have progressed, your stencil designs have progressed, but there's nothing that can really replicate the the hand movements of tattoo with the depth in the skin.
How's the tattoo removal business going?
That's actually moving forward pretty drastically.
A lot of mistakes to cover up.
People make a lot of mistakes, And laser tattoo removal has really moved forward where, even just a couple years ago, it was extremely difficult to, use that machine and pull that ink out. And now they have some people that can actually do like a reverse tattoo where...
Is it printing skin-colored ink?
What's that?
Is it doing it with skin-colored ink? No.
No.
It's not, okay. The last tattoo I got was 30 years ago.
That's it. I've seen some where people will black out their entire arm, and then the laser removal artist is good enough to be able to do a ink remove design, which is a pretty cool look.
That's solid. Aaron? We talked about discharge for a minute.
Yeah, discharge.
The new ink.
Well, I would say the future of ink is really promising. We have people here that are teaching classes. They're teaching classes in schools now that they weren't in the past, and I don't think it'll ever go away or die. People are going to have an interest in creating things. It's just going to be something that you have to do on your own, and that's always going to be the drawback is you have to physically work and do something. So,
or the upside. The drawback or the upside.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is actually rewarding, and I think once somebody does it, they'll recognize that and get the feeling and want to keep doing it. So I don't think it'll ever go away.
Jay?
I think it's all about squirreling away the good stuff when you get it, and planning for that. Because it's that old can of ink that I showed you. They don't make ink like that anymore. There's environmental reasons, I think, for a lot of it. So there are old printers that'll stand in a room and be like, I've never paid for a can of ink in my life, And like a guy showed up to my shop a couple of months ago with a pickup truck full of ink, and I was like, oh, so I picked through it, and I got like 5 pound cans of ink, and I gave him more money than I should have. But it's like that ink, it will always be there. It's just that, like, when you find something that you really love, I mean, I know it's like you want to save that, and so yeah, it is promising. But I definitely am saving stuff too.
Stuart, it's like you're teaching kids to print, and there was this massive window between, like, when Tom went to school, there was a printing press, much like the Plantin Press, in the junior high school. That's been gone for 30 years. But now you're bringing it back to in screen printing to like the elementary school even, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different things about this that, I mean, we love about it. There's a certain satisfaction of creating something yourselves. I think there's also, I think people have gotten a lot smarter. It's like you go to Target and you see something and it says limited edition. They made 18 billion of these. So it's like when you see a screen print or letterpress and it says limited edition, generally it's like, this is truly, a work of art. Somebody
crafted it. They took the time to make it. So it's like, I think there's people respect that more, or they're looking for that more. They're getting wise to it. It's just like, it's not just Command P and you get 8,000 of something. It's just like you actually, each color is pulled by hand. I mean, people often are like, why does it cost so much? I'm like, it's 10 colors. There's one screen for each color. There's 100 of them. That means there's 1,000 pulls.
Do you really give them that explanation?
Sometimes.
Okay. That seems like pretty long-winded for why did it cost so much.
They're like, they're pieces of art.
Right. There you go.
Yeah.
There was another question right there, yeah.
Do you guys find it difficult to differentiate yourselves in the marketplace?
Differentiation in the marketplace. Yeah, sure.
Where we focus on paper, so we're only one of a handful of people in town that do. I mean, there's a lot of people that do paper, but there's the amount of workshops we do and the facility we have. We're really unique in that way.
Not so bad.
I try and differentiate in the sense that we design and can produce the product. So it's almost like a one-stop shop. And in regards to letterpress printing, like we design with those parameters in mind when they're applicable to the end result. And that's kind of how we differentiate.
Yeah,
Indie Ink sells clothes.
We're kind of set up more as a service because of that. It's a lot more profitable to do graphic tees. You have a 2 to 5 year shelf life on your design, and then it's no longer going to be interesting. The new design's going to come, then the next design's going to come. And most streetwear brands and clothing lines have a 2 to 5 year shelf life because of that. And you get your window of opportunity, you take it, you drive it as hard as you can, and you hope you stick around longer. Sorry, can't hear me. You just hope that you stick around long enough to where you are also something that's desirable for something other than that first initial 5 year period. Those people have grown up, they've gotten older. The younger people don't want to wear what they were wearing, they want their new stuff. So it is a very high turnover in the marketplace as far as graphic tees. So I mean, we avoid that by letting other people create them, and we just make them.
I mean, it definitely is an issue separating yourself with tattoos. I mean, everyone has their own different kind of tattoo style, but within Colorado, there's something along the lines of like 480 tattoo shops. And then with social media as well, you can see tattoo artists from all around the world, and that has brought people to wanting to travel to another country to get tattooed by that specific artist. So if you can separate yourself and you promote yourself in a solid way, you can get people coming in from different parts of the world to get your work done.
I'm going to introduce Tom again really quickly. Tom isn't just Jason Wedkin's mentor. He was actually my second mentor and the first guy who told me about a guy who needed to move a printing press. And he's also been mentors for probably 30 or 40 other letterpress printers in the States. And not to take away his time, but there is only one Tom Parson, and everyone wants to say Parsons, because it seems that he's pluraled himself completely.
It's a made-up name,
yeah.
An immigration name. 480 tattoo artists. I think that's probably more than there are letterpress print shops in this whole region. So,
yeah.
And poetry doesn't have a market. There is no market for why I do what I do. And I've been lucky in terms of letterpress stuff. I came into it when the industry was collapsing, and I was able to go to auctions and just pick up a whole room full of stuff. And so part of my job, I think, was to figure out how to save that, or how to use that, how to make it useful to other people. But I've been lucky that my wife has a good job that's brought in enough money for us to live on, and I've only had to cover my costs in the printing in order to accumulate all this stuff. When I work with somebody else, Jason is a designer, does letterpress printing. I say don't base your marketing on me, because I don't know how to do that, and I don't approach it that way. And you've got to make it. You've got to judge your pricing and your marketing and your evaluation and stuff. You've got to make yourself happy. Make yourself feel like you have been paid what you need to be paid to do what you want. I'm well paid for what I do.
Tom is notoriously inexpensive, but has a year-long waiting list.
When I turn around and see that Jason has now got an employee doing letterpress printing, that's blows my mind away. I mean, it's like this thing can come back, and there's ways of us marketing this stuff together in some ways. But